Hello and welcome back to Yoga Off the Mat. If you are brand new here, my name's Emily and this series is all about the different elements that make up a yoga practice and trying to understand them a little bit more. And today we are looking at something a little different, chanting in yoga, chanting Om, chanting mantras, things like that. Whether you are a seasoned yogi or whether you've never been to a yoga class, you have probably seen somewhere this image of a group of yogis, yoga practitioners, sitting around chanting Om. Maybe in TV and film somewhere you will have come across that concept. But generally speaking, here in the Western world, we don't have a real appreciation or understanding of what it all means and why it happens. So for those of you who are curious about this, I'm going to try and answer your questions in this video. So what does Om mean? Why is it chanted? If you go to a yoga class, when can you expect it to happen? What kind of styles of yoga do this chanting? And if you go to a class and it happens, do you have to join in? How can you get past that feeling of being a bit silly and self-conscious when you're doing it? So first of all, those of you who have come to my yoga classes or those of you who've practiced yoga here on YouTube with me will know that I don't chant Om in the classes that I teach. We don't do any chanting in my classes. There's a couple of reasons for that, but mostly it's because I know that not everyone feels comfortable doing it. People can feel quite self-conscious and uncomfortable with chanting, especially when they're just sort of starting to learn about yoga. And the other reason really is I want to make sure that if I include something like that in the classes that I'm teaching, everyone understands why we're doing it and understands the culture that it's coming from and make sure that we do it in a respectful way. But when I go along to classes as a participant, I love chanting Om. I love going to classes where there is some chanting in the class. Because I suppose I now have a lot of experience with yoga and so I do feel comfortable doing it and I understand the purpose. And so I really get a lot out of doing that. So I wanted to make this video to just explain it a little bit to you so that if you go along to a class and there is some chanting, you might feel a bit more knowledgeable and empowered to join in if you want. But I will answer one of the questions already about, do you have to join in? No, of course you don't. If you go along to a class and there's chanting happening and you don't feel comfortable with it, just listen, that's fine. All teachers or most teachers are going to be absolutely fine with that. You don't need to pretend that you're chanting and do the mouth bit. Leave it out, just stay silent, listen and close your eyes and then just enjoy the sound. Okay, so let's talk about Om. This is the most common chant that you might do in a yoga class anywhere in the world. Sometimes written OM, sometimes AUM, sometimes OHM. And there's also this symbol, which is very commonly used around the world, and this is the symbol that represents Om. Om is considered a sacred sound or mantra throughout India, but also in Buddhism and Jainism. It's described as the sound of the universe, the sound of all things in existence. And it represents the concepts of creation, divinity, and the power of the universe. And Om breaks down into 4 sounds. So it's a bit more complicated than just Om. So you have A, O, which is why it's sometimes written as AUM, because that's kind of the sound that you're making. So those are the 3 sounds, and then the 4th sound is actually just the silence that follows it. So there's a silent pause afterwards. And the reason that that is important, that silent pause, is because when you create that sound, that Om, and you hold that there's a kind of vibration in your chest. It's a very calming sensation as you do it, and it also is just brilliant for clearing your mind. Once you're focusing on that sound, that vibration in your chest, usually you'll find that all of your thoughts just kind of dissipate and there's just a nice silence and clearness in your mind. And so that silence that comes after the sound is so special and feels quite magical because not only is there silence in the room around you, but there's also just a moment of quiet in your mind as well. One of those lovely little gaps between thoughts that we don't get very often. And also when you're practicing in a room full of people and everybody is chanting Om at the same time, and you hear everybody's voices kind of coming together, that vibration, it's almost like a buzzing around the room. It can feel quite a bit sort of electric and magical. And then with everybody focused on that same sound, and you can feel almost everyone's thoughts just drifting away, And then once you have that silence afterwards, it's a really powerful feeling. This silence throughout the room, silence through everyone's minds, and everybody just tuned into that same moment. And so this is why if you go along to a class and you don't feel comfortable joining in, you can still get quite a lot out of it just by listening to the sound of everybody chanting, and then listening to and just sort of immersing yourself in that silence that follows. So what are the benefits of chanting, or chanting Om, for example? Well, aside from that sort of mental clarity and that calming feeling that you get in your body from the sound and the vibration and then the silence, I think probably the most beneficial thing, in my opinion, is the way that once you get used to doing it, once you get past the silliness and the feeling of being self-conscious, it's that sense of freedom that you get. I talked about in the first episode in this series that yoga is all about liberation from suffering, freeing ourselves from any kind of suffering. So in terms of the physical body, physical suffering, if you have a bad back, that's a type of physical suffering. And through yoga asana, through the poses, you can gradually ease some of that suffering. But it's also mental suffering, things like intrusive thoughts, anxious thoughts, stress, things like that. Through our yoga practice, through meditation, through breath work, we can start to calm the mind, and we can combat some of those negative things, that mental suffering. And so with things like chanting Om, another kind of suffering that comes up is this feeling of worrying what other people are thinking about you. Worrying that you look silly, that you're getting it wrong. And again, those intrusive thoughts can start to come in, and it's that voice in your head that goes, oh my God, you sound ridiculous. You're getting it wrong. You don't sound the same as everybody else. And so at first you probably will have a little bit of that. But with time and with practice, that voice will be drowned out by the sound of you chanting Om. And you will start to get more comfortable with it. And it's a very freeing feeling to do something that maybe you felt silly doing at first, but now you feel free. And it's the same with all of the things that we do in yoga. If you think back to your first ever yoga class, some of the poses that we do, you probably felt a bit self-conscious, a bit silly doing them. Downward facing dog, for example, sticking your bum up in the air in a room full of people. Probably felt a bit silly, a bit self-conscious doing that at first. But now, if you've been practicing for a while, you probably don't even give it any thought. You just come into that pose comfortably, and you're more focused on yourself, how it feels. You couldn't care less about the people around you, I hope. And the same thing goes with chanting Om, or just chanting in general. It can feel really strange at first, but then with time you get comfortable with it, you can start to really enjoy it more and immerse yourself in it. And there's this wonderful feeling of freedom. And the more we do things like that in yoga, things that maybe we feel uncomfortable with at first, and then we find freedom within it, the more we can start to let that trickle out into our lives in general and feel more free in everything that we do, feel less concerned with what other people think or looking silly. Okay, then moving on to when you would chant in a yoga class. So you won't do this in every class. As I said, in the classes that I teach, I don't do any chanting. But if you go along to a class where there is chanting, it's most likely to happen either at the beginning or end, or maybe both of the class. You're very unlikely to do any in the middle. If you're chanting Om, you usually would either chant it just once, just one Om, or you'll do 3. Chanting Om is quite common in all styles of yoga. Another quite common one across the board is Om Shanti. So adding on to Om, that concept of creation, divinity, power of the universe, we add the word Shanti, and usually you'll have Shanti 3 times. So it'll be Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Shanti means peace. And the reason why it's often repeated 3 times is to represent peace in the body, peace in the mind, and peace in the soul. Then in certain styles of yoga, like Jiva Mukti and Kundalini yoga, you will almost certainly do some chanting. So in those 2, for example, you will more than likely do some kind of chanting, and it may be more than just chanting Om. You might chant a whole sort of mantra, a phrase. Sometimes it's even things longer than that, like full songs. So in Kundalini yoga and Jiva Mukti, you are likely to spend some of your time chanting. That's quite a significant part of those styles. But in things like Hatha yoga, Vinyasa yoga, styles that are quite prevalent here in the UK at the moment, you're unlikely to do anything more than just chanting Om or Om Shanti. And then to end this video, I thought after all of this talk about freeing yourself from feeling silly and not being self-conscious and not worrying about what other people are thinking, I thought I would put myself in those shoes and do some chanting now. So I'm going to chant the sound of Om 3 times. If you'd like to join in, brilliant, I'd love for you to do that. If you want to just listen, then that's great too. As I said, you can really enjoy some of the benefits of it just by listening. So if you are going to do that, I'd recommend just turning off any other background noise. If you've got the TV or something else on, just turn it on to mute for now, so that you can really listen to the sound and then listen to the silence afterwards. If you want to join in, we're going to take a nice big breath in and then we will chant that sound, Aum. We're going to do that 3 times and then afterwards there'll be a pause for about sort of 20 seconds of just silence. And it'd be nice if you can just close your eyes and just listen. Okay, here we go. So wherever you are, whether you're joining in or just listening, sit up tall, relax your shoulders and close your eyes. Then we'll take a deep breath in. And here we go. Okay, then keep your eyes closed just for another moment if you have the eyes closed. Just see how you feel. Take a nice deep breath. And then open your eyes. Okay, that's all for today. If you have any other questions about chanting, about Om, or anything else to do with yoga, leave it in the comments below and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.